Here's part two of my great interview with Senator Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina. He talks about the left's push for socialism and the need for opportunity zones. Take a listen. You and Ben Carson and myself at the NEC and President Trump. So we put together, I think, roughly 1,000 opportunity zones. You mentioned opportunity zones in your great speech 6 weeks ago. This is bringing money into the underserved areas. They're mostly minority areas, although it can be poor whites as well as poor blacks and so forth. Now, you mentioned that. That's a key point. I think that was part of the great recovery we were having pre-pandemic. The Bidens don't ever mention opportunity zones. I don't know, Senator, what they're going to do with it. I hope the heck they keep them. But that is a perfect example of something constructive and specific and, material money that can help the whole racial story in this country.
Absolutely. It is the fastest way, Larry, to the future. It's through empowerment and opportunity. Opportunity zones says it better than most pieces of legislation in the last 30 years as it relates to combating poverty from the private sector perspective. We've tried to combat poverty from the public sector. The government trying to be God has simply not worked. It can't work, it won't work, and it never will. And so what do we do instead? Well, we believe that in the whole concept of the invisible hand, Adam Smith spoke about this decades ago, that simply says that the more power we put in the hands of the individual, the better off we all will be, because we all care about our own self-interest more than anybody else. Opportunity Zone says to investors, we're going to give you an incentive to look into those areas that you may have overlooked before, because there's now a vested interest in your participation in some of the most disenfranchised communities in America. $75 billion later committed to those areas. What have we seen? We've seen wage growth somewhere near 7 to 8%, twice what it was pre-pandemic for all of America. We've seen property values increase, and the people who live in those zones own their property 60 out of 100 times.
That's the key.
We've also seen
black ownership, minority ownership, Tim Scott. That is the key, not welfare dependency, minority ownership. Come back to your speech. By the way, one of the things I most admire about you is your optimism, your love of the country. But I'm an old Reagan optimist and remained very optimistic 40 years later when I worked for Trump. And actually having this interview with listening to you're making me even more optimistic today. So that's always a good thing. I will quote from your speech. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. You said that about 6 weeks or so.
Absolutely.
You still feel the same way right now. And you mentioned specific items like the infrastructure package, taxes, school choice, police and election reform. You had that all in your speech as part of the Scott agenda that I think the entire GOP should adopt. Is this looking like a joyful springtime?
Well, Larry, it certainly is a joyful springtime if you don't look at the government. The truth of the matter is Americans are getting it together every single day. As we emerge out of this pandemic, even the Biden administration can't stop a fierce return in the third and fourth quarters of GDP growth. Here's what we should have, however, is we should have the wind at our backs and not in our faces. And that's what small businesses around the country will face with the type of spending we've seen from the Biden administration. $1.9 trillion for our COVID package that spent less than 10% on COVID relief. A $2.3 trillion infrastructure package that actually eliminates right-to-work laws in 27 states. That is antithetical to developing infrastructure and frankly has nothing to do with infrastructure. And then this new focus on family planning. I don't know what $1.8 trillion buys you in family planning, but we can't afford it. So literally, we should go back to the drawing board and believe in the American people. When we do that, it is springtime in America. We are the most capable people who are willing to lean into opportunities disguised as obstacles problems that lead to promise. When we do that, we have the greatest discoveries. One of the reasons why President Trump's administration and people like you helped us bring forth the Warp Speed project that brought a vaccination in less than a year is because we believe in American ingenuity. The world believed and leaned in with us, and we did what people said was impossible. Even in a decade, we did it in less than a year. That's one of the reasons why it is springtime in America. It has less to do with the government and more to do with what I am convinced to be the truth. The greatest, most exceptional people on God's green earth are ordinary American citizens who believe in their nation, who believe in their communities, and who believe in themselves. When we come together, nothing, not even the Biden administration, can stop us.